Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The night Connor vanished did not announce itself with sirens or shattered glass but crept in like a breath held too long, unnoticed until the realization struck that something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. Because one moment Genoa City believed it understood the shape of its fears and the next it was staring into a void where a child should have been. A silence so loud it swallowed reason whole, and as the hours ticked by and Connor failed to appear, failed to answer, failed to exist in the places he was supposed to be, panic spread in widening circles, tightening its grip around Adam's chest until every memory of his son became both a comfort and a weapon, each smile and argument replaying in his mind with merciless clarity as he searched for meaning in the smallest details, the forgotten jacket, the unanswered phone, the way the air itself felt wrong. While Chelsea spiraled into a terror so raw it stripped away composure and left only instinct, the primal certainty that a mother feels when her child has been taken not just from sight but from safety. The official narrative formed quickly, too quickly, full of reassurances and procedural calm that rang hollow against the chaos boiling beneath the surface, because Connor did not simply wander off, he did not disappear into chance, there was intention here, a design hidden beneath layers of coincidence and half-truths. And as chance and the authorities traced digital footprints and dead ends, whispers began to crawl through Genoa City like shadows at dusk, whispers that this disappearance was not isolated, not accidental, but tied to a much darker current flowing beneath recent events, a current that led inexorably back to Annie, whose actions in the days leading up to Connor's disappearance had been erratic yet precise, emotional yet calculated, whose tears and outbursts now seemed less like instability and more like smoke designed to obscure something far more dangerous, because the more her timeline was examined, the more the cracks began to show, subtle inconsistencies that suggested she knew more than she claimed, that her grief and confusion were not reactions but rehearsals, and still the question lingered, unspoken but vibrating in every room where Connor's name was uttered. Was Annie acting alone, or was she merely the instrument of someone far more strategic? Matt's name surfaced slowly, cautiously at first, as if even speaking it aloud might give it power, because Matt was not a man who operated in the open, he was a presence felt more than seen, a manipulator who thrived in shadows and leveraged chaos like currency, and as fragments of his past dealings with Annie came into focus, a chilling pattern emerged, one that suggested emotional influence, psychological pressure, and a history of planting ideas and letting others believe they were their own. And suddenly Annie's breakdowns, her impulsive choices, her frantic need for validation, all took on a new and terrifying context, as if she had been nudged, guided, and ultimately unleashed at the precise moment when Connor was most vulnerable. Adam felt the walls closing in as guilt clawed its way into his already fractured psyche, because if Matt had orchestrated this, if Annie had been pushed into becoming a pawn, then Connor's disappearance was not just an act of cruelty but a message, a punishment delivered with surgical cruelty, designed to tear Adam apart piece by piece, and as he replayed every interaction, every warning he dismissed, every threat he underestimated, the realization settled like poison in his veins that his past sins might have finally found their most devastating expression. Genoa City watched as alliances shifted and trust eroded, as friends eyed each other with suspicion and enemies found themselves united by fear, because a missing child had a way of stripping away pretense and revealing the raw, ugly truth beneath power struggles and moral posturing, and with each passing hour the mystery deepened, surveillance footage that vanished at critical moments, phone records that suggested deliberate misdirection, eyewitness accounts that contradicted one another just enough to keep the truth just out of reach, all pointing toward a mind that anticipated the investigation before it even began. Annie, under mounting pressure, began to crack in ways that could no longer be dismissed as grief alone, her words slipping, her emotions oscillating between panic and eerie calm, and those closest to her felt it, that unsettling sense that she was both terrified and relieved, as if part of her new Connor was alive somewhere yet feared what would happen when the full truth finally clawed its way into the light. And when she finally whispered Matt's name in a moment of unguarded despair, the room seemed to freeze, because confirmation did not come as a confession but as a surrender. The unspoken admission that whatever had been set in motion was now far beyond her control. The possibility that Matt had engineered Annie's actions reframed everything, transforming a tragedy into a conspiracy and casting a long, suffocating shadow over every step taken so far, Because Matt did not seek chaos for chaos's sake. He sought leverage, and Connor was leverage in its most unforgivable form. A living bargaining chip whose absence spoke louder than any threat ever could. And as Adam vowed to burn down every secret and lie standing between him and his son, the danger escalated because desperation made people reckless, and recklessness was exactly what Matt counted on. Behind closed doors, deals were proposed, information traded, and moral lines crossed in the name of urgency, while Chelsea wrestled with the unbearable duality of hope and terror, clinging to the belief that Connor was alive even as the darkness of the unknown threatened to swallow her whole. And in the quietest moments, when the city slept and the search stalled, the true horror of the mystery revealed itself, not just in the fear of what might have happened, but in the realization that someone had planned this suffering, had mapped out every emotional landmine and waited patiently for them to detonate. As pieces continued to fall into place, a haunting picture began to emerge, one of manipulation layered upon vulnerability, of Annie's instability exploited rather than healed, of Matt's invisible hand guiding her toward choices that felt inevitable in retrospect. And yet the most chilling truth of all was that Connor's disappearance was not the endgame, only the opening move, because a mind capable of orchestrating such precise devastation would not stop until every target had been fully dismantled. And as Genoa City stood on the edge of revelation, caught between hope and horror, one certainty loomed larger than any theory or suspicion. Connor's disappearance had exposed a web of secrets far more dangerous than anyone imagined. And when the truth finally surfaced, it would not simply answer the question of whether Matt was behind Annie's actions. It would redefine every relationship, every motive, and every lie that had been quietly shaping their lives, proving once again that in Genoa City, the most terrifying mysteries are not those born of impulse, but those engineered with patience, purpose, and a devastating understanding of the human heart. As the second day without Connor dawned, the city awoke not to clarity but to a deeper, more suffocating uncertainty, because mysteries do not fade with daylight in Genoa City, they sharpen, and every unanswered question about Connor's disappearance began to feel less like a gap in information and more like a deliberate wound left open to bleed, as if someone wanted the fear to linger, to ferment, to rot into desperation. Adam barely slept, pacing through empty rooms where Connor's presence still clung to the air in half-finished thoughts and abandoned routines, each step echoing with the unbearable awareness that time was slipping away and that whoever held the advantage was counting on that erosion of hope, because panic clouded judgment and grief made people predictable, and predictability was power. Chelsea, meanwhile, moved through the hours in a haze of forced composure and private collapse, answering questions with mechanical precision while her mind screamed through worst-case scenario she refused to voice aloud, haunted by the idea that Connor might be watching the same sky from somewhere unknown, wondering why no one had come yet, and that thought alone was enough to splinter her resolve again and again. Investigators circled back to Annie with renewed intensity, no longer treating her as a fragile bystander but as a potential keystone in a far larger structure of deceit, and the pressure revealed fractures that could no longer be hidden, moments where her narrative faltered, where she paused too long before answering, where her eyes darted not toward fear but calculation, as if measuring how much truth she could afford to reveal without collapsing the entire facade. Whispers of Matt's involvement grew louder, no longer speculative murmurs but an undercurrent of certainty threading through private conversations, because patterns were emerging, and patterns were Matt's signature, a meticulous orchestration of influence that thrived on emotional proximity rather than overt control, the kind of manipulation that left no fingerprints but plenty of damage. Old records surfaced, buried connections between Matt and Annie that painted a picture of dependence disguised as guidance, of encouragement laced with subtle coercion, of a man who positioned himself as a savior while quietly reshaping her perceptions of right and wrong, safety and threat, until the boundaries blurred and his voice echoed in her decisions even when he wasn't physically present. Adam confronted this truth with a fury that bordered on madness, because if Annie had been nudged into her actions, if Connor's disappearance was the result of a long game rather than a moment of instability, then Matt wasn't just an enemy, he was an architect of suffering, someone who understood exactly where to strike to cause maximum devastation, and that knowledge ignited a recklessness in Adam that terrified those closest to him, because vengeance and rescue began to blur into a single, dangerous impulse. The city itself seemed complicit in the tension, streets quieter than usual, conversations hushed, as if Genoa City understood on some primal level that a line had been crossed. That a child's absence changed the rules of engagement and stripped away the illusion that anyone was untouchable. Annie's mental state deteriorated under the weight of scrutiny, her emotions swinging violently between defiance and despair. And in unguarded moments she spoke in fragments, sentences that hinted at promises made to her, assurances that everything would work out if she just followed a certain path, phrases that did not sound like her own thoughts but rehearsed mantras planted by someone else. And each time Matt's influence was implied, her reaction was visceral, as if the mere suggestion of his name tightened an invisible leash around her throat. The authorities began to suspect that Connor's disappearance was less about revenge and more about leverage, a theory that gained terrifying credibility when cryptic signals surfaced, subtle enough to evade immediate detection but clear in intent, indications that Connor was alive and being carefully guarded, not harmed but not free, held in a state of suspended existence designed to extract obedience, silence, or capitulation from those who loved him most. Adam recognized the tactic instantly, because it mirrored the emotional warfare he himself had endured, the kind that didn't destroy its victims outright, but dismantled them slowly, forcing them to choose between impossible options until they broke, and the realization that his son was trapped inside such a psychological cage ignited a guilt so consuming it nearly crushed him, because no matter how twisted the logic, some part of him believed this was his fault, that Connor was paying the price for a lifetime of Adam's enemies, mistakes, and unfinished wars. Chelsea, sensing Adam slipping toward a point of no return, tried to anchor him, reminding him that Connor needed strategy, not sacrifice, but even as she spoke she wrestled with her own dark thoughts, the temptation to bargain, to give up anything and everything if it meant hearing her son's voice again, a temptation Matt undoubtedly anticipated and waited to exploit. As night fell once more, a chilling development surfaced, a recovered fragment of audio that placed Annie near Connor's last known location, her voice strained but resolute, speaking words that sounded like reassurance yet carried an undercurrent of finality. And when confronted with the evidence, Annie finally broke, not into confession but into terror, sobbing that she had never meant for it to go this far, that she believed Connor would be safe, that she was promised control when in truth she had surrendered it long ago. And in that moment the question shifted from whether Matt was behind her actions to how deeply he had embedded himself into her psyche. Genoa City reeled as the implications sank in, because if Matt could manipulate someone so thoroughly, then anyone was vulnerable. And the hunt for Connor became inseparable from the hunt for the truth about Matt's reach, his resources, and his endgame, a truth that remained maddeningly elusive. Adam made a decision that would alter everything, stepping beyond legal channels and public cooperation to pursue his own line of inquiry, driven by instinct and rage, fully aware that every step he took deeper into Matt's world increased the danger but unable to accept passivity while his son remained missing. And as he crossed that invisible threshold, the mystery surrounding Connor's disappearance thickened into something far more ominous, because Matt had never intended this to be a simple vanishing. He intended it to be a test, a reckoning, and as the pieces aligned under a blood-red horizon, one terrifying certainty emerged with brutal clarity. Connor's disappearance was only the beginning, and the truth waiting at the end of this twisted path would demand a price far greater than anyone was prepared to pay. The final hours before the truth surfaced carried a strange stillness, the kind that settles just before devastation, as if Genoa City itself were holding its breath, aware on some instinctive level that the mystery surrounding Connor's disappearance was about to cross a point of no return, because the silence was no longer empty but loaded, heavy with the accumulated weight of fear, manipulation, and choices that could not be undone. Adam moved through the city like a man possessed, following a trail only he seemed able to see, fragments of conversations, old grudges resurfacing in his mind, subtle tells that spoke the language of someone who understood psychological warfare because he had survived it, and every instinct screamed the same name, Matt, until denial became impossible and pursuit inevitable, while Chelsea waited in a state of unbearable suspension, clinging to the fragile hope that the longer no bad news came, the greater the chance that Connor was still alive, still breathing, still waiting. The breakthrough came not with violence but with revelation, when Annie, hollowed out by guilt and terror, finally shattered completely, admitting in a whisper that Matt had promised her purpose, safety, and redemption, that he convinced her Connor would never be harmed, that this was never meant to be a disappearance but a necessary pause. Words she now understood were lies crafted to sound like mercy, and as the full scope of his manipulation spilled out, it became horrifyingly clear that Matt had not forced her hand, he had shaped it, guiding her decisions until she believed she was acting freely, a realization that destroyed her even as it freed the truth. The location emerged in pieces, enough to set the final act in motion, and when Adam arrived, heart pounding with equal parts terror and hope, he found Connor exactly where Matt intended him to be. Hidden, isolated, frightened but alive, kept in a controlled environment designed not for harm but for demonstration, proof that Matt could reach into Adam's life and remove the thing he loved most without leaving a mark. And when Adam finally held his son again, the relief was so overwhelming it nearly buckled him, because survival felt miraculous after so much darkness. Matt was gone, vanished as cleanly as Connor had been taken, leaving behind no confession, no confrontation, only the devastating knowledge that he had succeeded in his true goal, which was never possession but power, the power to haunt, to destabilize, to remind Adam that some enemies did not need to be seen to win. Annie faced the consequences of her actions, no longer shielded by confusion or manipulation, her tragedy etched into the understanding that being used did not erase responsibility, and as Genoa City absorbed the outcome, there was no sense of victory, only exhaustion and a sobering awareness of how close everything had come to irreversible loss. Connor's return did not erase the trauma because some disappearances linger even after bodies are found, and as Adam watched his son sleep safe at last, he understood with painful clarity that this ordeal had changed them all, that Matt's influence would echo in nightmares and trust issues and the quiet moments when fear resurfaced without warning. Genoa City moved forward as it always did, but it moved wounded, carrying the lesson that the most dangerous villains are not those who strike openly, but those who understand the mind well enough to weaponize love itself. And as the mystery closed, one chilling truth remained. Matt may have lost Connor, but he had proven his reach, and in Genoa City, that kind of shadow never truly disappears. It only waits.